A single DNA sample, smaller than a grain of salt, sat untouched in an evidence box for 40 years. In 2025, an AI-assisted forensic system connected that forgotten trace to a man detectives had never identified, never interviewed, and never even suspected. The file room was silent. The cardboard boxes were stacked shoulder-high in a narrow archive corridor. Dust hung in the air as investigators opened a case many believed would die with the people who first worked it. By the end of this video, you will know how artificial intelligence helped crack a 40-year-old cold case, why detectives failed to solve it for 4 decades, and what happened when the victim's family finally learned the truth. This case marks a turning point in criminal investigations because it shows that evidence once considered useless can now speak again through machines capable of finding patterns no human can see. By the end of this video, you will know exactly how AI and genetic genealogy identified the suspect, what stopped police from solving the crime for 40 years, and why this breakthrough is changing the future of every unsolved murder investigation. February 14, 1985, Arlington, Texas. 26-year-old Terry McAdams was found beaten to death inside her apartment. Detectives flooded the scene. Witnesses were interviewed. Physical evidence was collected. Every lead was chased. Yet weeks became months, and months became years. The killer seemed to vanish into thin air, leaving behind only fragments of evidence and a question that haunted investigators for 4 decades. Who had done this? The case quickly became one of Arlington's most frustrating unsolved murders. Detectives changed. Police chiefs retired. Entire generations of investigators came and went. The evidence remained locked away inside storage facilities while Terry's family waited for answers that never arrived. Each passing year made the mystery heavier because every year reduced the chance that anyone would ever face justice. By the 1990s, forensic science had changed dramatically. DNA testing was transforming criminal investigations across the United States. Cases once considered impossible were suddenly being solved. But Terry McAdams' murder remained stubbornly out of reach. The evidence existed. The technology existed, yet no match appeared in any database. The trail seemed to end at a dead wall. For decades, detectives revisited the case whenever new forensic methods emerged. Evidence was retested, files were reviewed, witness statements were re-examined. Thousands of pages of reports were studied again and again. Each review produced the same result: no suspect, no arrest, no answers. And that raised a disturbing possibility. What if the killer had never been arrested for another crime? What if his DNA had never entered a database? What if the person responsible had lived an ordinary life while investigators searched in the dark? As the years passed, many cold cases across America were solved through advances in science. But Terry's murder stayed frozen in time. Families watched other victims receive justice while their own case remained unresolved. The question never disappeared. It simply waited. And then technology took a leap nobody could have imagined in 1985. For years, investigators operated under the traditional assumption that solving the case required a direct DNA match. That was the accepted model. Crime scene DNA entered a database. If the offender had previously been arrested, a match would appear. If not, the case remained unsolved. It was a reasonable theory. After all, thousands of cases had been solved that way. But the approach depended on one critical condition. The suspect had to already exist somewhere inside the system. Terry McAdams' killer did not. In 2021, new testing generated a stronger DNA profile from evidence collected at the crime scene. Detectives hoped the improved profile would finally trigger a match. It didn't. The database remained silent. Once again, the investigation appeared stuck, but a new generation of investigators refused to stop there. Instead of asking whether the suspect was in the database, they asked a different question. What if a relative was? The Arlington Police Department partnered with forensic specialists and the FBI to apply investigative genetic genealogy. Advanced software examined massive family tree databases and searched for distant biological connections. Millions of records were processed. Relationships separated by generations began to emerge. Tiny genetic links formed a trail stretching backward through time. The old theory was starting to crack. But the deeper investigators went into the family tree, the more they realized the answer might be connected to a man who had already left behind a trail of violence. Nobody had connected to this case. The official explanation that the killer could only be found through a direct DNA match was collapsing. A completely different path was appearing, and at the end of that path stood a name. Using genetic genealogy, investigators identified relatives connected to the unknown DNA profile. The software narrowed possibilities that would have taken humans years to calculate manually. Branch by branch, investigators eliminated hundreds of individuals. Families spread across multiple states were analyzed. Generations were mapped. The suspect pool shrank from thousands to one. That one name was Bernard Sharp. Bernard Sharp had never been considered a suspect in Terry McAdams' murder. In fact, he had been dead for decades. Investigators discovered that only months after Terry's killing in 1985, Sharp was linked to a separate double murder before dying by suicide. Because the investigations occurred independently, nobody connected him to Terry's case. The missing link simply never existed. Detectives obtained DNA from one of Sharp's relatives. The comparison was conducted using modern forensic methods unavailable in 1985. The result was definitive. The crime scene DNA matched Sharp's family line and confirmed his identity as the killer. After nearly 40 years, the mystery finally had a name. But the biggest revelation was still coming. The true story is larger than one murder investigation. AI-assisted genealogy did not merely identify a suspect. It proved that evidence can gain new value decades after a crime occurs. A sample ignored for 40 years suddenly became powerful enough to solve a homicide because technology evolved faster than anyone expected. Across North America and Europe, investigators are reopening cases once considered impossible. DNA fragments, fingerprints, photographs, and handwritten reports are being analyzed by systems capable of processing millions of connections in hours rather than years. Cases buried beneath decades of silence are speaking again. And that forces a deeper question about who we are as a species. For thousands of years, time protected criminals. Witnesses forgot. Evidence degraded. Memories vanished. Today, that protection is disappearing. The digital age is creating a world where the past becomes harder and harder to escape. A mistake made 40 years ago can suddenly reappear under the light of technologies that did not exist when the crime occurred. The dead cannot testify. Yet increasingly, their evidence can. After nearly 4 decades, AI-assisted genetic genealogy helped identify Bernard Sharp as the killer of Terry McAdams, finally giving investigators and family members the answer they had sought since 1985. But here is the question that remains. If one forgotten DNA sample could solve a murder after 40 years, how many other unsolved cases are sitting inside evidence rooms right now, waiting for technology that has not been invented yet? Share your theory in the comments. Click the next video on your screen for another discovery that will leave you questioning everything.